It's pretty hard to learn music production, just like any new skill you're trying to learn. And you will most likely run into a ton of roadblocks on the way. Like, there's all this new stuff to learn, compression, effects, plugins, synths. But the thing is, you won't get past these obstacles by buying fancy new plugins or learning super duper crazy production hacks. Which begs the question, how do you actually get better at music production? So let's look at 6 ways to improve your production skills. Why 6? I don't know. It's more than 5, I guess. The first thing I want to talk about is critical listening. What does that mean? Well, I think critical listening is not just consuming music as a background noise, which is absolutely fine, by the way, I do that all the time, but you just sitting down, closing your eyes, and really trying to immerse yourself into the sound of the music. And then really starting to carefully listen. Okay, here's what I want you to do. The next time you're listening to music, sit down and ask yourself the following questions. What elements are there in the track? What is the structure of the track? Or how did the artist achieve a certain sound? For example, a drum sound or the snare or the synths. And maybe you will notice that there will be drums and bass and synths in the track. Ask yourself, what kind of drums? Are they electric drums? Are they acoustic drums? And how about the bass? Is the bass a synth or is it like an electric bass guitar? Let me give you a little exercise. Here's a short clip of my latest single, High Line. Try to apply the questions I mentioned earlier to this track and let me know your answers in the comments. Anyway, I actually took a course on audio production during my semester abroad a couple of years ago, and we actually did an exercise just like this with some popular tracks like, I don't know, Foo Fighters, Bob Marley or something. Yeah, we just listened to them and really try to analyze the tracks. So I really do think that this is something that is worth your time and really helps you improve in getting better at producing. Moving on, I'm going to allow you to become a thief. Yeah. A lot of great art is a product of theft. Let me explain. Obviously, I do not mean that you should copy another artist's work piece by piece and then just release it and call it your own. That's not what you should do. But I would argue that all art is stolen in some capacity. There's actually a book about this very topic. It's called Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. I personally haven't gotten around to reading it yet, but I have it on my radar and I thought I'd let you guys know. Anyway, how do you actually apply this idea? The way I see it, there are 3 ways. The first one is you listen to music and think, hey, this sounds really cool and I want to make something like this. So you just go into your DAW and do something that is inspired by this. And I would say this is like the most common way how most artists come up with their ideas, that they get inspired by something else and then just try to do something that is, vaguely similar. For me personally, it's usually that I don't know, I like a certain drum pattern or I like a certain synth sound and I just want to emulate that and work around that idea. Recently, I've really enjoyed listening to like stuff like Object or Drum that have like these really insane sounding drums, and I want to kind of work this into my own music or in my own style. The second approach is that you literally just pull a track into your DAW and then you use this as a template for a new track. So you put this into arrangement view and then you just add some markers like in Ableton. You can just set markers and then you title them like intro or the drums start or hi-hat starting or new bass line or stuff like that. So you basically just notice any change within the track. This is a method that has taught me a lot over the years because it really teaches you about song structure. And again, the idea here isn't to copy the track 100%, but just use the track structure as a template. Trust me, your final track will always be very different from what the original track is. The third method is literally just copying the track, but this is obviously, again, do not release it that way, and unless you have explicit permission to make a cover of a track, then sure, go release it. Yeah, you really just try to remake someone else's work. Yeah, I think this just forces you to really think about an artist's decisions. And don't worry about getting it perfect. It's very unlikely that you will at the start, especially if you're just a beginner at production. Your first few attempts will always be very off from what you're setting out to do, but that's fine. Just take it as a learning experience and move on. Okay, next on our list, I want to introduce you to one of my favorite ways to improve. and that is watching other artists work. So far we've covered actively listening to music, analyzing music, and now it is time to see music in practice. The great thing about that is that you don't even have to do anything besides sitting on your butt and just munching down on some snacks if you want to. Okay, so when you're first starting out, your instinct is most likely to just check out a bunch of tutorials like how to produce music, how to use Ableton, how to mix and stuff like that. And yeah, these tutorials definitely have a place and they are a very important tool, especially if you're just starting out. But I believe that once you know the basics, they become less effective in teaching you how to produce. The way I see it, the problem is twofold. One, most tutorials are aimed at absolute beginners, which totally makes sense since beginners are usually the largest portion in any niche. And second, the more advanced tutorials can give you a false sense of what is actually needed when you're trying to learn producing. Because the reality is you usually don't really need like these super crazy and complex patches to get a great sound. Usually it's quite the opposite. So watching other artists shows you that production can in fact be really, really simple. There are actually a bunch of channels here on YouTube that focus more on making music instead of tutorials. It's also the reason why I mostly make content where I actively make music instead of making the 100th tutorial on compression. Yeah, but that's not all. There are also like live streams on Twitch you can follow, or you can watch interviews by artists that break down one of the tracks. Like for instance, I've seen a great one by Fortet where he talks about one of his tracks on his latest album, and it was really helpful to see because you can then see, like, you have someone like Fortet who obviously makes insane music, and then you see his Ableton session and it's like super simple. It's insane, really. And yeah, so on. There's a bunch of stuff you can find. Okay, the next point I want to talk about is working in different genres. One of the biggest mistakes I made when I started making music in Ableton was just making techno, because that was the genre I wanted to make at the time. But the thing is, if you don't really challenge yourself, you will quickly hit a wall. And writing in other genres is a quick and easy way to get around this wall. But why? So by trying to understand how other genres work, you are inevitably learning new concepts along the way. So then you can apply these things into the genre you are working in usually. Personally, once I've stopped just producing techno, I really saw some progress. Today I don't even make techno anymore, at least not in the usual sense. It's like, yeah, sure, I still have some influences, but yeah, it's definitely not the main sound. By doing this, I really got way more comfortable with experimenting and trying out new stuff, and it made the whole process so much more fun and fruitful, honestly. I would also encourage you to make music in genres you are not really familiar with or that you don't even really listen to. Again, just see it as a way to learn something new. Also, as a quick side note to this point, go listen to a ton of different genres. I personally listen to all kinds of music, and even if I'm listening to something that I do not particularly enjoy at the moment, I always try to find something in there. At the very least, a better understanding of what actually makes my taste in music. Right, point number 5 is another one that is very dear to my heart because it taught me so much over the years. And that is getting, and even more importantly, giving feedback. So you've written a bunch of tunes, but you have absolutely no clue what's wrong with your music. What do you do? Well, one of the easiest way is just to ask for feedback. And I know this can be scary, but in my experience, most people are really trying to help you and are really kind when they give you feedback. So you don't have to be afraid of anything. So how do you actually do this? Let me first say that asking friends and family is probably not the best approach. They love you and that's fine, but they most likely won't give you the best feedback because, yeah, they don't want to hurt you, and they, in most cases, are probably not really qualified to give you feedback because they don't make music themselves. They can just say, yeah, this sounds cool and that's it, but that doesn't help you. So what works much better, in my experience, is asking strangers for feedback. I mainly ask for feedback on Reddit. Chances are that there is some sort of production subreddit for the genre you are working in. And if not, there's also the We Are Music Makers community. They have a feedback thread sticky to the top, and you can just go in there and ask for feedback. And sure, there are also communities on Discord where you can ask for feedback. Like, for example, the Ableton Discord has like feedback forums. Or you could ask on SubmitHub even, although sometimes the feedback there isn't the greatest, but you can still do it. The most important thing when it comes to this is that you ask for specific feedback. Don't just go into a thread or a forum and drop a link and say, yo, check this out, or even worse, don't say anything, because then you won't get any good feedback, obviously. Instead, think about a couple of questions. For example, how does my track flow? How do my drums sound? Why do my drums sound awful? How does the low end sound? And stuff like that. So remember to be critical of your own work. Don't just go in there assuming that you always make the best bangers imaginable. I'm sure you do, but don't assume it and just go in there and be a little bit critical so that you can actually come up with a couple of questions. So I mentioned at the beginning of this section that giving feedback is even more important. Why is that? Well, On the one hand, it's obviously nice to help another artist out who wants some feedback. But more importantly, it also forces you again to really think about someone else's work and critique it. And again, be specific when you give feedback. Be specific as you can be. Don't worry if you still don't have all the terminology down. It's fine. Just try to explain it in your own words and the people will mostly understand what you mean. Also, please, 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 please don't be afraid to give constructive and honest feedback. That's something I saw all the time, that people were afraid to give honest feedback. It's not rude. Like, the people come in there and want their work critiqued, so you can give them negative, quote-unquote, feedback. If something sounds bad, just tell them and give them a possible solution for making it sound better. It doesn't help if you say, wow, this is fire, cue fire emojis, when it in fact isn't that much fire, cue fire emojis. Put yourself out there, you got this, you are awesome, I believe in you. Alright, finally our last point on this list. And that is setting yourself some limitations. That is one of the most common pieces of advice I've heard from all sorts of artists. And it is really true, it really does help. But why? The way I see it, if you use limitations, you are really forcing yourself to think outside of the box. I actually have a series dedicated to this very thing on my channel, where I remake one of my old tracks in a certain amount of time. And it has like certain parameters that mess with me during that, so that it makes it a little bit more difficult. So I'm really forced to make something new and unique. I also released a single like a year ago where I just used one synth for the entire track, except for the bass and the drums. It didn't really work. But all the melodic parts are written with just this one synth. By the way, that wasn't some fancy ass 4,000 euro synth that can answer the questions of the universe if you fiddle around with it long enough. No, it was just a 20 euro stylophone, which you can see there on my table. Okay, I already mentioned time as a possible limitation, like for example, see how many ideas you can come up with in an hour, for example. Or write a track with just one sample of your cat meowing and telling you to feed it and to do it now. There are also contests that you can find online that have some sort of theme. I, for instance, used to join a challenge on the techno production subreddit. And yeah, it was really fun to work with these weekly challenges and to come up with something that kind of fits this theme. So yeah, limitations. Really awesome tool to have in my humble opinion. Right, that was a whole bunch of stuff that I think was worth talking about and will help you improve your skills. But before you run away and start producing your next greatest banger, a word of caution. Music production needs time. You know, as they say, Rome wasn't built in a day, and that is also probably true for your next DnB anthem, that it will need some refinement before getting it out there. And while our modern capitalist society has us believe that we absolutely have to be super productive all the time and have to be inhumanely quick about it, the reality often is that learning a new skill will take time, often years. And that is totally fine. So if you're feeling that your progress is not fast enough, relax. It's going to be fine. If someone else is faster than you, then it doesn't matter. It's something I wish I had realized earlier in my production career, because I often spent time fretting about, oh my god, I'm just not making any progress. Oh, this is sounding awful and I will never make great music, blah, blah, blah. But come on, that's bullshit. Even if your music isn't of the bestest quality yet, the thing that matters the most is that you are making art, and that is always a great thing. With that being said, let me know what you think. Did I miss anything? What is your favorite method of improving? Just let me know in the comments. In any case, thanks for stopping by. Maybe subscribe, maybe leave a like, maybe leave a comment, and I'll see you maybe in the next one. Bye!